Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I'm so excited to have my next guest on the show. He's got a ton of experience in law enforcement, and now he is the VP of Law Enforcement and Government at TalentSmartEQ, Dr. Greg Campbell. What's up, buddy? Thank you for being on the show.
Hey, man, thank you for having me, Patrick. I've been looking forward to this day. I feel like a horse, Patrick, that's at the Kentucky Derby that you pull into the stall, and now you got to make them wait till the other 15 horses get in the gate. I've been ready to go, man. The moment I met you, I'm like, I can't wait a month to get in, to get in with them. So been looking forward to this day.
Well, I'm glad you're here, sir. And, you have a ton of law enforcement experience. You were the postal inspector, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, right? You were the person.
Yes.
And
I was second in charge.
You work with local agencies and doing, all the stuff, the investigative stuff, all that stuff with the Postal Service. How is that like? Because I really know nothing about, and I apologize, Greg, but I really know nothing about, I know the Postal Service, but what do the postal inspectors actually, and I hate to say this, actually do? I know they have an important function.
Yeah. So
what do they do?
For asking that. And it ain't the first time somebody's asked me that question, believe it or not. If I was to call my mom right now, she'd tell you, Patrick, I work for some other 3-letter agency. So let me explain to you and the rest of your audience what we do. Well, the Postal Inspection Service is actually the oldest federal law enforcement agency.
Oh, wow.
So before there was a DEA, before there was an FBI, there was the postal inspectors. Now, there is one other agency that tries to stake the claim, and that's the U.S. Marshals. But the Postal Inspection Service, Benjamin Franklin was actually the first postal inspector.
Wow.
And we, early in our history of our agency, we worked stagecoach robberies, bank robberies, train robberies. So we were that agency when the country first began. And that's what I loved about the agency. We investigate over 200 federal statutes, from fraud to identity theft, to mail bombings, to homicides, to assaults, to drugs through the mail, international investigations. And that's what I loved about the agency. I have friends who work for, other agencies, and they work drugs, and then that's all they've ever worked their whole career, or work for the FBI and they work robberies, and that's all they worked their whole career. I had a chance to work across our organization's platform, from fraud to homicides to mail bombings. Worked on the Unabomber case, worked on the ricin case, anthrax case that touched the White House. I've had a wonderful career, 27 years as a federal agent.
Wow. And I can't, because you tell me, Greg, there's millions of parcels and letters that come into the United States Postal Service on a daily basis, I imagine.
Absolutely.
So we have to make sure your job and other members of your team have to make sure those parcels, for one, don't have any nefarious items in them, and make sure there's no fraud and all that stuff. So I can't imagine the logistics and the manpower behind something like that.
Absolutely. And that was the excitement for me
of
getting up every day, knowing that you work in a job not only to protect and serve, but every household in America receives mail on a daily basis. And your job is to not only protect those citizens, but to protect the system, the United States Postal Service that delivers that mail. Most people don't realize it, but years ago, people received their checks through the mail. Now, in today's time, a lot of people receive their medicine through the mail. There's so many important items that go through the mail. So, as a postal inspector, most law enforcement only work criminal investigations. Postal Inspection Service, we not only had the responsibility for the criminal investigations involved in the mail, but we also protected it against natural disasters. So hurricanes, tornadoes, 9/11, when that hit, we had a post office underneath those towers. All of those things come into play. And you're dealing with natural disasters to get that mail back up and running so that people can get their finances, so that they can get their medication. And so that's a career. I say all law enforcement is the most noble profession, but it's really powerful when you know that people are looking for that mail on a daily basis and how important it is.
Well, and I've taken it, I think a lot of people, well, I can't speak for anybody, but me, I mean, I take the postal service for granted sometimes. Okay, the mail's going to be there, but I fail to realize, and thank you for educating me, sir, the massive undertaking this is every day to make sure people get they need, that everything keeps going. And obviously it starts with people like you and other wonderful people that work at the Postal Service.
Yeah, and Patrick, that's not uncommon to hear that either, that you take the Postal Service for granted. And that's not a bad thing from a organizational standpoint, I don't think, for this reason. The Postal Service, while I was working for the Postal Service, prior to retiring, was voted the most trusted government agency many years in a row, over 7 years in a row. What that does is it says that people know that their mail is going to come. That rain, sleet, or snow, that motto of the mail will be delivered, no matter what's happening, people trusted in that mail and grown accustomed to believing that it would get there. And that's important. We need systems in place. I went to Joplin, Missouri one time, Patrick, and it was the worst hurricane tornado that I had ever seen. Actually, it was the first tornado that I'd ever seen. And as far as my eyes can see, the whole city was flattened. Wow. Home Depot gone, schools gone, hospitals gone, fire trucks balled up as if you took aluminum foil and put it into a ball. And it was my first time being outside of California and seeing a tornado. And the thing that I heard citizens say, what brought peace to that community, Patrick, was when the mail got back up and running. Yeah. So oftentimes we only think about the mail going in the box, but people take comfort in believing that society is moving, things are getting back to normal when mail delivery starts. So it's a huge role of that we played, and I enjoyed every minute of my career.
Well, thank you for your service, sir. And well, let me ask you this. So I remember, I don't know if you can answer this or not, Greg, but I mean, you remember when like FedEx and UPS and all these other carriers started to come to fruition. I don't know how many are there, but I remember hearing, talking, this was years ago, but, oh yeah, the U.S. Postal Service is dying. They're not going to be able to compete with, all these other carriers. But it sounds like the USPS isn't going anywhere. I mean, it's been in existence for so long. It's reliable. I mean, so what's your take on that? Have you ever heard that before?
Oh, absolutely. I heard that many years. And here's what I would say. Here's what we would say to our employees. Because as I moved up in the organization and became second in charge of the whole country as a deputy chief postal inspector, I had the responsibility of inspiring the people who work for me. I say it this way: hurt people, inspire leaders, inspire others. So as a leader, I pride myself in inspiring people. So as it relates to your question, I would say something like this to you and others. I'd say the same thing was said when the telegraph came about.
Yeah, that's true.
The same thing was said when the telephone came about. The same thing was said when the fax machine came about. And when the computer came about. There's so much business being done. Think about all the packages that you receive at your house every day. The computer, internet is a wonderful place to buy online, but those packages still have to get to your home.
True.
So the Postal Service has evolved over the years. And that's why the Postal Inspection Service was such an amazing agency to work for, because we had to adapt and change.
With the times. Yeah. You got to be resilient and you got to keep going.
Yes. Had to be resilient, had to be agile. And that's what I'm hoping to see in law enforcement today.
Yeah.
Our training, law enforcement is different today due to budget constraints, due to hiring challenges, retention and recruiting of new police officers, due to social justice issues and morale issues. All of those things now that wasn't in play previously. You could actually do your job and focus, but now police departments are doing so many different functions as well. But police departments have to be resilient and agile in order to change. And I've been there. I've done it over 27 years and had to demonstrate those skills. And that's why emotional intelligence is important. I wouldn't have called it that early on in my career. I didn't know what it was, but it's like life. You find yourself talking to somebody that's a little older, a little more mature, that's been through a few more things in life, and you go, oh, I do that. Oh, I do that. And you say, that's emotional intelligence. So what I hope to be able to do is just help police departments understand that emotional intelligence is not a soft skill, or not just a soft skill. It's actually a power skill. And that's what I get up every day to try to help police departments understand and take them to the next generation of police training. And that's emotional intelligence.
And that's amazing. And I know you talk to a lot of agencies. You're an author, you're a speaker, you're doing so much, brother. And I love what you said about you either have to adapt or die on the vine, for lack of a better word. You know, and I think what you're seeing, and I can't speak for you, is sub agencies are clinging on to this culture within that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
You know, and because they don't want to change. And the reality is, as you know, doctor, you're going to either go with the change or go with it kicking and screaming, because it's going to happen.
Yeah. So, you know, here's the way I like to say it, and I love the way you put it as well. And the way I try to communicate that to leaders of police organizations is I say this, and you know this because you worked in law enforcement. I said, before we stop a person on the street, we're going to get intelligence on that person.
Absolutely.
Hey, are you in Phoenix, Arizona, and it's 110 degrees, and you're wearing a big coat with a beanie on? Hey, that's a red flag. It's too hot for a big coat. Before we stop a car, we're going to get intelligence on that car. We're going to maybe run the plates. We're going to know a little bit about how many people's in the car. We're going to know some things about that car before we pull it over. Before we go into a house and execute a search warrant, we're going to say, who's living in that house? Are there any weapons actually, assigned to that house or registered at that house? Who's getting mail at that house? It's going to tell us a lot. So we get intelligence on people. We get intelligence on cars. We get intelligence on houses. But in law enforcement, we tend to fail to get emotional intelligence on ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's what this really is about. It's important to know your own self. You can't lead others if you can't lead yourself. You can't protect and serve others if you can't first.
Why is it so hard, doctor, for people? And I think a lot of people like this, you correct me if I'm wrong in your assessment, that are so reluctant to do a deep dive internally.
Yeah.
And look inside and say, okay, these are my weaknesses. These are the things I have to improve on. I need to be constantly evolving, constantly being able to go to that next step. And I'm sure when you're out there, Greg, talking to people, you get some resistance because cops, I don't have to tell you, law enforcement, they don't want to appear as weak. They don't want to appear as, we got to appear, macho all the time, or whatever word you want to use. And they don't want to show any signs of weakness because that might seem to them that they're weak. And you know what I mean? To their part, I don't have to tell you, you know what I mean? Why is it so hard for law enforcement? I think the younger generations get a little better with that. But at our generation, you and I, and still a lot of cops on the job in law enforcement, doesn't matter what you're doing in law enforcement, federal, state, local. I think that's a lot of people out there that still think that way.
I think it's part of the culture.
Exactly.
So you'll hear individuals point their finger at law enforcement today simply because of and I'm going to say the few incidents that you see on TV, social media, that have been magnified in law enforcement. And you'll hear individuals talk about what's taking place in law enforcement, the bad apples. The first thing that I tell people is I'm not interested in bad apples. I'm interested in the orchard. Because the orchard is the culture. Now, I'm a boy from the inner city of Los Angeles, Patrick. Don't let me fool you, man. I don't know nothing about farming. I don't know nothing. But I've been interested in, I've talked to farmers.
Yeah.
And I said this, and I love talking, as you can tell. I said, I've never seen a farmer plant a seed on a Monday and say they have crop failure on a Tuesday. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
You plant the seed, you got to water, you got to fertilize, you got to till, you got to take up the weeds, you got to do all the work that goes in it before it produces the fruit. And Absolutely. We've become a society that's only focused in going to the store and grabbing the orange, the apple, the plum, the fruit of life. And we forget about how important the culture is. We forget about how important the orchard is. It's the orchard that produces the fruit. And the roots are important to the orchard. The roots of an individual's life, yours and mine, is how self-aware are you? How do you manage yourself once you understand those emotions? And then, are you aware of your surroundings, social awareness, and how do you manage relationships? I'll say it like this. How many of us have said something that we wish we can go and rewind it and take it back?
Me.
How many of hey, me too. How many of us have hit send on that computer and wish we could recall that message? Yeah. I'll go a little old school. How many of us have dropped a letter to a blue collection box and wish we could have the key to get it back out of there? Yeah. And that's life. Our brains, our emotions are the way we process information, we act on that information, and we even listen to information. So people ask me all the time, well, Greg, who's your audience? Who's your audience talking about emotional intelligence? And I say anybody with a brain and anybody with a heart. Because before you make a rational decision in your brain, it goes through your emotional brain. That's why emotional intelligence is important. And to get back to why is it so difficult? Because think about it. One of the toughest conversations I ever had in my life was with myself.
Absolutely.
Matter of fact, I'm working on my next book, Patrick. It's called Developing You, how to use emotional intelligence to get through the challenges of life.
Oh, geez, got to have you back on that for that, brother.
I write a letter to myself. The little boy from Compton, California, writes a letter to Dr. Campbell. And I explain to the person in the mirror that I'm a boy from Compton who has 6 family members serving 25 years to life in California prisons. I don't have any family members. I don't have an Uncle Patrick or Uncle Devin that have graduated from high school or college that I can use as my example. I didn't have any examples, Patrick. So when you think about people in certain our life circumstances, our upbringing, our home environment, all those things influence us. And then we start to fear. Well, who am I?
Yeah.
What's my purpose? Can I make it out of this situation? And I like to say it like this. When you say to yourself, I am fearful, it becomes your identity. When you say to yourself, I have fear about snakes or a particular thing, then it becomes an event. And too many people let fear become their identity, and it paralyzes them. So we don't like to look in the mirror. And policing, law enforcement is one of those professions. Although it is an honorable and noble profession, sometimes we have gotten in a complacent, and we've done things for years the same way we've done them. We shoot 1,000 rounds and they develop habits. And there's a reason. It protects, it saves our lives. But there comes a time where you have to adapt, be resilient, be flexible. And I think the time is now for training that our first weapon of choice shouldn't be our firearm.
Yeah.
It should be our brain.
Absolutely.
That's what we're trying to do with emotional intelligence. Give people the skills to be able to use the brains.
Yeah, absolutely. And well said, sir. Yeah. I mean, and I agree with 100%. And I tell people sometimes, look, from my experience, going back to what you said, Greg, a little bit, the hardest battle I have ever fought in the military, it was tough. Law enforcement, as you know, the hardest battle is with myself.
Absolutely.
The self-deprecation, all those things that we get into our head, and something else you said, we as a society, I think we want the quick fix.
That's right.
We think about social, we're scrolling through social media. All right, we get 15 seconds of this. That's how we're conditioned now. And the reality is to improve, this, doctor, it's ongoing.
Yes.
Plant the seeds. Like you said, I love that analogy. Plant the seeds and constantly weed your garden, right? Yeah. Not only plant the seeds, but you got to make sure that you get rid of the weeds because of and they're going to come.
Yeah.
Weeds being thoughts and negative people. Yeah. If you don't weed your garden, what's going to happen?
Yeah. And Patrick, let's go a step further since we're already there. The best flowers, my wife loves to garden, and she talks about the value of pruning. And when you started to talk about your military career, you started to talk about, being in policing and not wanting to change. Sometimes we get to a point where we have to be pruned.
Oh, I love that.
And if we're not pruned,
yeah,
we won't get better. Sometimes, boy, I tell you, I wish I would have learned some life lessons and listened and learned them through wisdom or through other people's experiences. But there were things in my life where I had to hit rock bottom in certain circumstances.
Amen.
And I call that pruning. But that
Amen.
pruning was necessary in order for growth to occur. And so what I think we're seeing right now in law enforcement is a pruning. You're seeing a younger generation who we have to recruit from. Those who are going to retire someday, those old heads like us, that have left law enforcement.
we
can't do it fair.
Get out of there, old man.
Yeah, we got to get out of there. And so in order to show them that how noble this profession is, you're going to have to do things different. You're going to have to train differently. We're going to have to show them the value of this job differently. You're going to have to lead differently. Well, you're going to do what I said because you get a paycheck.
That doesn't work anymore.
Today's time, we might have to explain why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Hey, you draw your taser in this situation because X, Y, and Z. You draw your firearm in this situation because X, Y, and Z. You use your verbal judo, your brain, in this situation because it can de-escalate.
Yeah.
A new word that wasn't around when we were going through.
No,
policing.
It was ask, tell, and take.
That's right. Yeah. But now we can de-escalate a situation. It's just different.
Yeah.
And we have to embrace that.
Because I think
forward.
the younger people, the younger crew that are coming in, officers, and I've talked to many of them, and what the sense I get, and they say it in different ways, is, look, we work to live.
Yeah.
We don't live to work.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I, if I can make that assumption, it was, we live to work. At least I did, signing up for everything and all that stuff. Yeah. And you do what you have to do to take care of your family. But it's to your point, Doctor. I mean, now it's different. So we have to adapt. We have to change. We have to be malleable, as a profession. And the people who don't change, as far as organizations, they're the ones with the high attrition rates, probably. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to be successful.
Exactly. Patrick, I want to go back because you reminded me of something. I say this to police departments. I say, hurt people hurt people. Yeah. I said it earlier. And I say that because officer well-being is my number one focus when I get up in the morning. How can you protect the communities that you serve if you're not good yourself, if there's not wholeness going on within yourself? I can only use myself as an example. When I first became a federal agent, I was working undercover narcotics. I was working biker gangs. I was working street gangs, and I was good at it. I loved it, Patrick. I enjoyed every bit of it. But what I didn't understand is that I was having adrenaline rushes because I love my work so much. You said it another way. I raised my hand to do every assignment. And that's that type A. We're fixers. We're doing. Yeah. And just raising your hand, you're doing a good job. You want to be successful. You're also having adrenaline rushes in your brain. And then you come home, Patrick, and your wife say, "How was your day?" "It was good. Where's the remote?" That might work for 2 days.
Or I'm going to go sit somewhere alone and have a drink.
Come on. There it is. Or 5 days. "How was your day?" "It was good. Where's my drink? Where's my glass?" 30 days. "It was good. Where's my remote?" And then all of a sudden you get to a point and your partner, your spouse say, "We don't communicate. We need help." And then we're a part of a culture that's not accustomed to raising our hands to say we need help. Well, I like to say it this way. The absence of illness does not equal well-being.
Yes.
And sometimes in this profession, we think, no, well, my blood pressure's good. I'm not falling out or passing out. We don't think there's an illness, so we think we're good. And that's not absolutely true. No. You can not have a quote unquote medical illness, but not have well-being. And that's what I'm trying to point out to departments. it's important that you have peer mentoring programs. It's important now that we have, encourage psychological counseling and counseling programs in our departments. It's important that we have buddy programs that officers can go to another officer and share when they're struggling with something. That's critical if we're going to move forward. Hurt people, inspired leaders, inspire others. And that's the message that I want to portray to law enforcement, my law enforcement brothers and sisters.
I love it, brother. Now, what advice, Greg, and I'm sure you get this a lot, what advice would you give somebody right now that is listening, maybe, that wants to get into law enforcement, doesn't, whatever, state, federal, local, whatever. What advice would you give them today?
I have a philosophy no matter what profession that you want to get into. I say go meet with people who are in that profession. Talk to as many people as you can. So I have a 20 go on ride-alongs. I have a 23-year-old son, and he initially wanted to be, looking at being a dentist or optometrist. I said, well, let's go meet with some.
Yeah.
And, so I try to get people to spend time with all the folks in that profession. How many of us, went to school or college and we went there for one thing, and by the time we left, it was something entirely different.
Completely different.
Completely different after you take that one class. I went to school to be an accountant. I took one accounting class and say, nope, not for me. Yeah. I think I'm gonna go into something else. And we don't know what we don't know. So I encourage people who want to be in law enforcement, go meet with someone at a police department. Police departments would love to share with you, the best parts about this job, the tough parts about this profession, going on a ride along and seeing how you can change someone's life and impact someone's life. Matter of fact, there was a case out of North Carolina recently. A 911 call came into a station. An officer gets the call on her computer. She responds. It was a little girl in a pool, Patrick. And as she exits her car, imagine that, she's running to deal with this call. It's a little girl in the pool, and on her way, she realizes she can't swim.
Oh, wow.
This is the police officer.
Yeah. She
jumps in the water anyway, saves the baby, performs CPR, saves the baby's life. The news asked her, how did you do it? She says, I can't even swim, but I took this job to protect and serve people. Wow.
Amazing.
How come we don't hear more of those stories? So if you go to a police department, learn about what happens behind the doors. That's how you know that this is a noble profession. I teach doctoral level students at a university, got many doctoral level students. I've had 3 students do recent dissertations on policing and use of force. Here's what each one of those studies found, Patrick, eye-opening. That the citizens that were a part of their study, their sample, their perceptions of police did not come from direct interaction with police. Their perceptions of police came from media and television and other forms of media.
Yeah. And
not from direct contact. So what I'm telling police departments is we even need to do community policing different.
Yeah.
Not just coffee with a cop. We should be training the public on here's what it is like to do a traffic stop. Here's what it's like to draw that weapon and fire that weapon. Just to let them know, we don't train to shoot a toe or to shoot a leg. That's not how we train. That's not. We double tap, triple tap. And so they wonder why with so many bullets shot. Well, that's the way we train.
That's the way we're trained.
Education.
Absolutely.
Very, very important. And it's reciprocal. It goes both ways. We need to change the training in law enforcement, but we need to do a much better job of educating the public about the job that our men and women do on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. And well said, Greg. And that incident you said with that brave first responder, that officer that jumped into the pool, I'm sure our audience members, and I know you know this, but that's happening every day.
Yes.
Thousands, tens of thousands of incidents like that every day.
Yes.
in law enforcement, and the vast majority of brave men and women who serve, doesn't matter what background you have, are good people. They're not out there. Nobody gets up in the morning, Greg, you know this, kisses their whatever spouse goodbye, significant other, or kids, and says, I'm going to go out there and shoot somebody.
Yeah, absolutely.
The scary thing is that some people think that way, but it starts with what you said, Doctor, better education.
Yes.
Educating people. No, that's just because you saw it on Instagram. That's not how law enforcement is like.
That's right.
or TikTok or whatever.
That's right. And Patrick, that's where emotional intelligence comes into play.
Absolutely.
You know, self-awareness, and then being able to manage yourself. You made me think about, I was one of the top agents we had when I first became a postal inspector, working narcotics, working mail theft. And then the organization moved me to a different assignment while I was working internal employees. I'm a street guy. I wanted to be out on the streets, going through doors. And they moved me to a different team and made me the public information officer. Patrick, I almost lost it. What do you mean? I'm leading the team in arrest. I'm doing my job. You're gonna move me to a PIO, but somebody saw something in me that I didn't see in myself.
You got to be the face, brother.
That's right. And that I needed to diversify my skills. You can work drugs. Yeah, and I did it, but I wasn't happy.
Mm-hmm.
I was mad initially. I was upset. I was angry. A better word is I was angry. And I said, you know what? I got two ways to respond. I could, have a growth mindset about this, or a fixed mindset about it. And I decided to say, how can I be positive? This is what I did. I became the PIO. I don't mind speaking. I've been talking my whole life. I just didn't want to be behind a desk. And so I said to myself, how can I make this fun? I figured out what was the slow media days. I was in San Francisco, figured out which days were slow media days. And you asked me a question earlier, and I told you that ain't the first time I heard that question. Most people didn't know what a postal inspector did. Yeah. So I started inviting the media in on slow media days to understand who are postal inspectors and what do we do. And I would give them tours around the office. I would lay out thousands of checks and say, here are the cases we're working. And it was just on the slow media days. And you know what I did? I developed some great relationships because I gave them something to do on their slow media days. But my goal was to get them to understand who we were as law enforcement officers. And then the next thing you know happened, Patrick, anthrax hits.
And they're calling you. They're going, great.
There you go. And now I'm the PIO. So I thought I was going to be bored. And it turns out that I was handling one of the biggest crises this country has ever seen with the mail. And just like you said earlier, I just expect my mail to be in my mailbox. Now imagine everybody thinking that something could be contaminating that mail. So my job was huge. And then I called on those relationships. I said, hey, all those people that I had invited in and became friends with, they now became my avenues to educate the public about anthrax. And so it's just a matter of when incidents take place, circumstances take place, are you going to respond or react? And when you're emotionally intelligent, you recognize those emotions, you understand those emotions, and then you manage those emotions. Yeah. I call it RUM, R-U-M. Recognize, understand, and manage.
And it goes back to like what do they say? I can't remember the exact statistic. 20% of life is what happened to us. 80% is how we react.
Yes. Yes.
Right. Yes. And most of the time when you're acting on emotions in the moment, you're going to make the wrong decision.
Yes. Especially if you don't use strategies.
Yeah.
And so the strategies that we talk about are simple. I can guarantee you've used them before. How many times has somebody said something to you that you didn't like, whether it was at home or at work, and you just said, you know what, I'm going to zip my lips and I'm going to count to 10.
That's a strategy.
My mouth. That's an emotional intelligence strategy, but it's just not saying something, it's thinking before you speak.
Or somebody cuts you off in traffic.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. Okay. I don't know what that person, this is where I have come a long way, Greg, because being a type A, I would have been, what? But now so that happens. I'm like, well, deep breath, but I don't know what this person is going through.
There you go.
I don't know if they're racing to the hospital. I don't know if they're having a medical crisis themselves. I have no idea. So I just let it pass.
I was just getting ready to say another strategy. I was getting ready to ask you, have you ever just taken a deep breath?
Yeah.
Just
deep breath. Yeah.
Just taking a deep breath. Just breathing.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Very powerful.
Powerful.
And I didn't learn this until I went through treatment.
Powerful. Well, most of it, Pat, I have to share this. I know we're talking about law enforcement today, but we have a program, a pilot now that we're running in West Virginia, and we've been training inmates in emotional intelligence. And man, when I tell you, it has been changing their lives. It has changed some of them's lives. You're starting to see, when you go to jails, you're segregated by race. You're seeing people with different races sitting next to each other.
That's
the
awesome.
Last time I was on with him, Patrick, one of the inmates said, Greg, Dr. C, I'm glad you're on today. He said, a gentleman on our way to class, and we're doing it Zooming. We're Zooming into 3 different prisons in the West Virginia, and we're teaching this content. He said, one of the inmates passed out on the floor, had a medical emergency in front of me. He said, back in the day, before I took this class, I would have walked past him and let him die. He was a different race than me. He said, but because I took this class, he said, I saved his life.
That is amazing.
And Patrick, the wardens and the superintendents of these 3 prisons, they just picked the worst of the worst, the toughest criminals, and it was a pilot, just 24 individuals from 3 different prisons. And they were from different housing pods at the prison. And this is what the inmates told me, Pat. They said that there's a waiting list, because you get the book when you take the course, Emotional Intelligence 2.0. They said there's a waiting list on the pod to read the book.
Wow.
I said, wait a minute. Oh, no. I said, we will send you more books to each one of those pods. And we did. That's how powerful this is. It doesn't only impact law enforcement. It impacts everybody with a brain and anybody with a heart. It will change your life.
Amazing, brother. Really quick, tell us about TalentSmart.
Yeah. So TalentSmartEQ is a company based off the book Emotional Intelligence 2.0, started by Travis Bradbury and Gene Greaves, and they wrote that book. And it comes with an assessment in the book. So when you buy the book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, in the back, you get a code, and you can take an assessment to see what are your emotional intelligence levels on those 4 skills that I've talked about. Mm-hmm. And that's important because emotional intelligence, unlike IQ, what your IQ is at 7, it's the same at 70. Personality, your personality is set by the time you're in your 20s or so. So what you are is what you are. There's a little variance where it can change. Emotional intelligence is a skill that you can get better at. So I like to say it this way: emotional intelligence is not a destination, it's a journey. So if your skills are low in one area, then you can get better at it by learning the skills, practicing those skills, and practice actually makes you better at stuff. And we've all heard it, but it works with emotional intelligence as well. And so it's exciting. So at TalentSmart, they were focusing on the private sector and government agencies and started doing some work with police departments. And what they saw, Patrick, is misconduct started to decrease. Use of force incidents started to decrease. Officer well-being was starting to be better. People don't realize the level of suicides that are in law enforcement.
Yes.
People don't realize the drug addiction and divorce rate that's in law enforcement. And again, focusing on that well-being, it's important. So what we start to see in departments, when you start to train officers in emotional intelligence, you start to see a sense of well-being. That department's culture starts to change. The orchard looks a little healthier. And now we don't have as many bad apples. And that's what this is all about. This is about officer well-being. And when you're whole and when you're healthy, you'll protect and serve your communities better. So we're seeing this content being used with new officers or academies. We're seeing it being used in mentoring programs, peer-to-peer programs. We're seeing it being used by command staff in leadership development programs within the departments. So it's being used in a number of different ways, de-escalation training. And so I call it train one, train all. Once we train you in emotional intelligence, you can train across leadership, mentoring, training in general, and community policing.
I love it, brother. Amazing. Amazing. Changing lives everywhere. And if people want to find you and TalentSmart, Greg, and everything's going to be linked up in the show notes.
Yeah.
Where can they find
Yeah.
you, brother?
Oh, you can find me. I'm not hard to be found. You can find me on my email at Gregory, Gregory, Campbell, Campbell, at TalentSmart.com. You can even go to TalentSmart.com and you'll find me there. You'll find our law enforcement content. You can follow me on LinkedIn. Love for you to follow me on LinkedIn. I'm not hard to be found because I get up every day to help people get better. Better EQ leads to better lives, and that's what I do on a daily basis. So Google me, talentsmart.com, gregory.campbell.talentsmart. You can find me.
Dr. Campbell, thank you so much, my friend. It was an honor and pleasure having you on. Thank you for your dedicated service to this great country, and thank you for helping people and making them better on a daily basis. Thank you so much, brother. I'd love to have you back on in the future, my friend.
Hey, I believe in relationships. It's the fourth skill, relationship management. And I've just collected you. I want to commend you, man. From the moment I met you, I
Thank you,
said,
sir.
This is not a one-time thing. This is somebody that I can connect with. And I'm gonna tell you what I already say. That's my brother. So Patrick, whenever you need me, you can call me, and just keep doing what you're doing, man, to help officers become whole and healthy.
Thank you, sir.